Every great house has its secrets. Every duchess was once a woman the world refused to see. And every love worth telling begins the moment someone breaks the rules. Welcome to Velvet and Thorn. Tonight's story begins in a ballroom, where a duke walked past the woman he was supposed to marry, and stopped 6 paces from a woman in gray. The ballroom went silent. 300 people. Not one of them breathing. The Duke of Thornmere had just walked past the woman the queen had chosen for him. Walked past her without a glance. Walked past the dais. Walked past every great family in the kingdom. And he had stopped 6 paces from a woman in gray. A woman nobody knew. A woman who had been told 15 minutes earlier not to draw his eye. He turned to the queen. His voice was very quiet, very calm, and it carried to every corner of the room. Your Majesty, I will marry her, or no one. The queen's fan stopped mid-air. The chosen bride's smile broke, and Hester Whitford, the poor relation, the spinster cousin, the woman in dove gray who had spent 15 years being looked through, discovered in the space of one heartbeat that the rest of her life had just been rewritten. She didn't yet know why. She didn't yet know about the inn at Tadcaster. She didn't yet know about the brown leather glove on his desk, or the 18 months he had spent searching for her name. She didn't yet know she was about to be loved, but the rest of the court knew, in that one moment, what Hester did not. The Duke of Thornmere had just declared war on tradition, and he had done it for her. Before we go any further, I want to say something to you. If you have ever stood at the back of a room and wondered whether anyone in it could see you, if you have ever been the cousin nobody invited, the daughter nobody bragged about, the woman in the corner that the world looked right through, this story is for you. So do me a favor, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, new stories every 2 days. Told the way they were meant to be told, slowly, beautifully, without apology. And while you're listening, leave one word in the comments, one word for the woman you used to be, before someone finally crossed a room and saw you. I read every single one. Now, let me tell you exactly how Hester Whitford ended up behind the second pillar of the state ballroom of Whitehurst Palace, and how a duke who had not smiled in 3 years walked across that ballroom to find her. It begins 3 hours earlier, in a dressing room, with a woman who had been told all her life to make herself small. Chapter 1. The Woman in Gray. It was 3 hours before the ceremony. Hester Whitford stood behind her cousin's chair, pinning pearls into Lady Felicity Ashford's golden hair. Her fingers were cold. They had been cold all morning. Hester had learned, very young, that cold fingers were not allowed to complain. Stand straighter, her aunt murmured behind her. Not to her, never to her. The Duke has been kept waiting 9 minutes. Let him wait, Felicity said. She admired herself in the mirror. He will not say no. Felicity had never been told no in her life. Hester had never been told yes. She was 23. She wore dove gray, the kind of gray that had been gray so long it had forgotten any other color. Her job tonight was simple. Stand 6 paces back. Don't speak. Don't trip on Felicity's train. Don't draw the Duke's eye. He is not the kind of man, her aunt had said that afternoon, who tolerates flaws in a setting. We will not have him distracted by the kind of face that reminds him of poverty. Hester had nodded. She had become very good at nodding. At 12, she had nodded when they took her from her father's grave. At 15, she had nodded when Felicity tore a page from her favorite book, just to watch her cry. At 19, she had nodded when her uncle told her that her usefulness consisted in not embarrassing the family. She nodded now. She did not look at herself in the mirror. She had been told, from the age of 12, that there was nothing in it to look at. The herald's voice came through the open doors. His Grace, the Duke of Thornmere. The whole court turned. Felicity's smile sharpened. Hester moved to her station, behind the second pillar, 6 paces back, hands folded, eyes lowered. She forgot to breathe. She often forgot to breathe in rooms like this. Breathing felt presumptuous. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, the kind of step that did not need to hurry. Your Grace, the Queen's voice rang out. May I present Lady Felicity Ashford, daughter of the Earl of Wexham, your intended bride. The footsteps did not falter, but they did not stop. Hester, even with her eyes lowered, felt the whole room shift its weight. Felicity's smile had not yet moved. The Queen had not yet realized. The Duke walked past Felicity. He walked past the dais. He walked past the assembled Privy Council and the Lord Chamberlain and the Bishop of London, and he stopped 6 paces from Hester. She forgot how to lower her eyes. He was tall. There was a scar along his jaw, white, old, running from beneath his ear to the corner of his mouth. His coat was black. His face did not know how to be soft. His eyes, when they found her, were the color of November. He turned slowly to face the Queen. "Your Majesty?" His voice was quieter than any voice she had ever heard in that room, and it carried farther than any. "I will marry her, or no one." The Queen's fan stopped. "Your Grace?" "The woman in gray, by the second pillar, or no one." Hester's lips parted. No sound came out. Felicity's smile, finally, broke. Chapter 2. The Burden. The next thing Hester remembered was being unable to feel her hands. They were folded in her lap. She could see them, but the cold had spread up her wrists, into her elbows. She could no longer feel where her own skin ended. The ballroom had turned into a different country. Felicity made a sound, not a word, a sound, like a bird with its wing caught in a snare. The Earl of Wexham was on his feet. The Queen had not moved. The Duke had not moved. There were 376 people in that ballroom. Hester could feel every one of them looking at her. She had spent 15 years being looked through. The difference between being seen and being looked through was so violent, so sudden, that she thought she might be sick. "Your Grace," the Queen said. Her voice was a blade now, clean and bright. "We will speak privately, at once." The Duke bowed, once, shallow. He did not lower his eyes from Hester's face. "At your Majesty's pleasure." He waited. The Queen rose. The court parted. They walked, the two of them, into the antechamber. The heavy gilt doors closed behind them. The ballroom exhaled. It was not relief. Felicity turned, slowly. She turned the way her own mother had taught her to turn, with the full weight of every Ashford generation behind her shoulders. She fixed her eyes on Hester, and in that one look, Hester saw the next 10 years of her life. "You," Felicity said. The room was so quiet that the word carried. "Felicity," the Earl said. "Not here." "You," Felicity said again. Hester's aunt was already moving. Her aunt's hand closed on Hester's elbow, the grip of a woman who had not been gentle since 1804. Hester stood. She did not stumble. She had learned, very young, not to stumble when she was being moved. "My niece is unwell," her aunt announced, loud enough for the whispers to hear. "She has been suffering from a nervous complaint. I shall have her removed at once." "Yes," the Earl said. "Yes. Have her removed." They walked her down the long gallery, past the portraits of dead queens, past the footmen who would not look at her, past the marble bust of George I, whose nose had been chipped at a state dinner 40 years ago. Hester knew this fact because Felicity had told it to her, once, mockingly, when Hester had asked. She remembered useless things at useless times. She had always done this. Her mother had said it was a sign of intelligence. Her aunt had said it was a sign of insolence. They reached a small private antechamber. Her cloak had been left there. Her aunt did not let go of her elbow. "You will tell me," her aunt said, the voice she used when servants were dismissed and the doors were closed. "What you have done." "I have done nothing. Do not lie to me, Hester. I am not lying." "He looked at you." "He did." "He chose you." "I know." "You know." Hester met her aunt's eyes, for the first time in perhaps a year. Her aunt's eyes were brown, like Hester's mother's eyes had been. Hester had always wondered quietly whether her aunt resented her for that one inheritance, the one thing that had not been left at the cottage when they had taken her away. "I do not know him, Aunt Margaret," Hester said. "I have never spoken to him. I have never been introduced. I have not the smallest idea why he has done what he has done. I am as confused as you are. I am as frightened as Felicity. I am sorrier than I can possibly say." Her aunt looked at her for a long moment. "You are not sorry enough," her aunt said. "You will be." A footman knocked at the door. "Begging your pardon, my lady. The Queen requests Miss Whitford in the antechamber, at once." Her aunt's hand finally fell from her elbow. "Go," her aunt said. "Whatever he wants of you, refuse it. Do you understand me, Hester? Refuse it. or there will be no home for you to come back to. None. Not in this house. Not in any house bearing the name Ashford. Refuse him." Hester nodded. She had become, after all, very good at nodding. She walked the long gallery again, alone this time. She could not feel her hands. She did not know what her face was doing. The only thought in her head was that the Duke's eyes had been the color of November, and her father had died in November, and she did not know whether that was a sign or only a thing she was telling herself because she had nothing else to hold on to. The footman opened the door. "Miss Hester Whitford," he announced. The Queen sat in a high-backed chair beside the fire. The Duke stood by the window, his back to the room, his hands clasped behind him. He turned when she entered. His face did not change, but his eyes did. Chapter 3. The Inn. "Sit," the Queen said. Hester sat, hard chair, placed exactly where a supplicant was meant to sit. She folded her hands in her lap, fixed her eyes on the floor between her feet. She waited to be told what shape her ruin would take. The Queen studied her for the length of a breath. "Miss Whitford." "Your Majesty." "You will look at me?" Hester lifted her eyes. The Queen was not as old as Hester had thought, 40 perhaps. The lace at her throat was the color of cream. Her eyes were small and cold and intelligent. They were taking the measure of Hester now, in a way Hester had been measured before, but never by a person who could destroy her with a sentence. "Tell me," the Queen said, "what acquaintance you have with the Duke of Thornmere?" "None, Your Majesty. None." "None whatsoever, Your Majesty. I have never spoken to him. I have never been presented. I do not know how he knows my name." "He has just informed me," the Queen said evenly, "that he met you 18 months ago, in a coaching inn in Yorkshire. He has been searching for you ever since. He has, and I quote His Grace exactly, thought of you every day for 547 days. I find this remarkable, Miss Whitford. I find this so remarkable that I asked him whether he is in his right mind. He says he is. Do you confirm that you have never been to a coaching inn in Yorkshire?" The Duke had not moved from the window, but his hands behind his back had unclasped. Hester's mouth went dry. She had been to a coaching inn in Yorkshire, once, 18 months ago. She had been 21 then, on the way home from a brief and disastrous attempt to be useful to a great-aunt in York. Dismissed for a reason her aunt had refused to name. She had been alone. The coach had broken an axle. She had waited in the inn for 9 hours. It had been raining. She had... What had she done? She had sat by a window. She had mended a glove, her own glove, the only pair she owned, which had torn at the seam climbing into the coach. She had a small silver thimble, her grandmother's. She had used it to push the needle through the cold leather. She had given a coin to a beggar at the door, because the woman had a child, and the child had been coughing. She had not noticed anyone watching her. She had been 21. She had been worn out. She had been very plain. Hester began. She stopped. She began again. "I was at the Black Boar Inn at Tadcaster for 9 hours in the November of 11. The Duke turned. Fully, he looked at her. His face did not change, but something behind his face did. Hester thought, with a clarity that surprised her, "He has been waiting for me to remember." "You see," the Duke said quietly to the Queen, "she was there. That she was at an inn proves nothing, Your Grace. It proves to me," he said, "that I am not insane," which I confess I had begun to wonder. The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Miss Whitford, do you wish to marry the Duke of Thornmere?" Hester opened her mouth. She had been told, an hour ago, by her aunt, what the only correct answer was. She had been told, all her life, by everyone, what the only correct answer to every question was. She drew breath to deliver it. The Duke spoke first. "Your Majesty, with respect, that is not a fair question. Your Grace, Miss Whitford has been informed in this last hour that the entire course of her life has been overturned by a man she does not know, in front of 300 witnesses, with no warning, no preparation, no opportunity to compose herself. Whatever answer she gives now will be given under duress. I do not wish her to answer under duress. I will not have her answer under duress." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "Then what, Your Grace, do you propose?" I propose that Miss Whitford be permitted to come to my London house, under the chaperonage of my late brother's widow, Lady Caroline Wexford, who lives there with her son. I propose that Miss Whitford have 6 months. I propose that during these 6 months she be permitted to know me as I am, to refuse me at any moment, with no consequence to her name, her reputation, or her safety. And if at the end of 6 months she does not wish to marry you, I withdraw the suit, I retire to my estate, I decline any further interest in matrimony for the remainder of my life. I have given your majesty my reasons. I will not modify them. The queen tapped the arm of the chair. And Lady Felicity? Lady Felicity is not, your majesty, my concern. You insult her family. I have insulted no one. I have stated a preference. The Earl of Wexham may take his daughter to any other unmarried duke in this country. I will not be a punishment for his ambition. The queen looked at him, really looked for the first time. Something passed across her face that might have been amusement, or weariness, or both. Miss Whitford, your majesty, you have heard the Duke's proposal. I will give you the courtesy of considering it. Will you go to Lady Caroline's house? Your aunt, the queen added, almost gently, has just informed his Grace's secretary that you are not welcome to return to the Earl of Wexham's residence. So I would advise you, Miss Whitford, to consider where you intend to sleep tonight. Hester's hands had begun to shake. She put them under the line of the table. I will go to Lady Caroline's house, she said, for 1 week, to consider. The Duke bowed. That is sufficient, Miss Whitford, thank you. And Hester Whitford, who had never in her life made a decision that mattered, watched the rest of her life bend, in that moment, into a shape she did not yet have a name for. Chapter 4. The London House. The carriage ride was 23 minutes. She knew because she counted. She counted the way she had learned to count when she was 7 and afraid of the dark, methodically, in groups of 4, because 4 was the number of corners in her bedroom, and her bedroom was the only place that had ever been entirely hers. The Duke did not speak. He sat opposite her, back to the horses, hands folded loosely on his knee. He did not look at her. He had not looked at her since the antechamber. Hester understood dimly that this was a courtesy. He was giving her the privacy of being unobserved. It was the first courtesy anyone had given her in 15 years that did not come with a price tag. When they reached the house in Berkeley Square, he stepped down first. He offered his hand. You need not take it, Miss Whitford. It is only there if you wish. She did not take it. She climbed down on her own. Her knees held her. She walked up the steps under her own power. The door opened. A woman stood in the hall. She was perhaps 30. Hair the color of weak tea. A small boy of 6 clutching her skirts. Her eyes, when they found Hester's, were warm. You are very pale, the woman said. Not a criticism, an observation. The way one might say you are very tired. Adrian, what have you done to her? I have proposed to her in front of the Queen Caroline. Of course you have. She has agreed to 1 week. Of course she has. The woman, Lady Caroline, turned to Hester. She held out her hand. Both hands, actually. Hester found that her own had risen before she'd told it to. Caroline took it firmly. You are Miss Whitford. I am Caroline. This is Henry. We are pleased you have come. You are not to be afraid of any of us. You are to have a hot bath and a quiet supper, and the bedroom that overlooks the garden. The garden is the prettiest thing in this house. And you have had a horrid day. How do you know I have had a horrid day? My brother-in-law has just chosen you in front of 300 people. I should think anyone would have a horrid day. The boy looked up at Hester. Are you the lady from the inn? Hester froze. Henry, Lady Caroline said. Uncle Adrian said the lady from the inn had brown hair and a thimble. The boy turned to the Duke, evaluative. Is that her? That is her, Henry. Humph, said Henry. He let go of his mother's skirt. He walked up to Hester. He held out his small, grubby hand with the gravity of a magistrate. How do you do? Hester knelt, before she knew she was kneeling. She took his small hand in both of hers. I am very well. Thank you, Henry. How do you do? I am 6. I have a wooden horse. His name is Captain. Would you like to meet him? Henry, Lady Caroline said, Miss Whitford has only just come through the door. It is all right, Hester said, surprising herself. I should like very much to meet Captain. The boy beamed. The Duke behind her was perfectly silent. Hester did not turn to look at him, but she felt the way one feels the change in a room when a candle is lit, that something in him had eased. Lady Caroline showed her up the stairs. The bedroom that overlooked the garden was small, clean, freshly aired. A low fire in the grate, a tray with bread and butter, broth, stewed apples. The curtains drawn back from the window so Hester could see, even in the dusk, the green of a square garden full of ivy and a rosebush gone slightly wild. Lady Caroline closed the door. "You will tell me if you need anything," Lady Caroline said. "Anything at all. There is a bell. It works. The girl who answers it is Annie, and she is kind. There is hot water in the can on the stand. I have laid out one of my night dresses, which will be too long but will keep you warm. You are not a guest, Miss Whitford. You are a person who needs to sleep. Sleep first. The world can wait until morning." Hester sat down on the edge of the bed. "I do not understand any of this," she said quietly. Lady Caroline came and sat beside her. "Adrian is not a man who explains himself," she said. "It is the worst thing about him. But I have known him for 12 years, since he was 22, and my husband first brought him home from Cambridge. I have never known him to do a thing without a reason that he himself believed in absolutely. He has reasons. They are good ones. He will tell them to you when he can. Until then, eat the apples, they are very good, and sleep. And tomorrow morning I will walk in the garden with you, and I will tell you everything I know about him that he would not think to tell you himself." She rose. She crossed to the door. She paused with her hand on the latch. "Miss Whitford." "Yes?" "My husband died at Salamanca 3 years ago. It is not a thing I speak of often, but I am telling you now because Adrian has not been the same man since, and I have wondered sometimes whether he ever would be. Tonight is the first time in 3 years I have seen him stand in a room and look, intent, as if there were something he wanted. I do not know what passed at the inn, but I know he has been a ghost, and tonight he is not. I am very glad you are here." She closed the door. Hester did not eat the apples. She sat on the edge of the bed in the borrowed bedroom of the dead brother's widow, in the house of the Duke who had upended her life. She put her face in her hands, and for the first time in 15 years, she let herself cry without making a sound. Chapter 5. The Breakfast. Hester slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a person who had run out of feelings. When she woke, the room was full of pale gold light. There was no clock. On the small table by the window was a fresh tray, hot tea, bread still warm, a small jar of honey. Someone had laid out a clean dress while she slept. Soft, pale blue muslin. A shawl folded beside it. The dress was not new. It had been Caroline's, perhaps, before her mourning. But it wasn't gray. Hester dressed slowly. She did not look at herself in the mirror. She had been told, from the age of 12, that there was nothing in it to look at. The habit of 15 years was not undone by one borrowed dress. She went down the stairs in her stockinged feet, the way she had been taught at Wexham House, where servants did not appreciate being woken by silk slippers on the parquet. At the bottom, a young housemaid stopped dead. "Oh, miss, the Duke is in the breakfast room. Lady Caroline said to tell you when you came down." "Thank you, Annie." "Miss." Annie hesitated. "Your slippers." "I know. I am sorry. I forgot them upstairs." "No, miss. The Duke gave instructions, new ones, by the front door." By the front door were a pair of soft kid slippers, the color of cream, in her size. There was no note. She put them on. They fit. She did not understand how. She did not want to ask. She went into the breakfast room. The Duke was alone. He was reading a letter. There was coffee at his elbow, a plate that had not been touched. He looked up when she came in. He stood. "Miss Whitford, Your Grace. I trust you slept." "I did, thank you." "Will you sit?" She sat. He did not return to his seat at once. He went to the sideboard. He poured a cup of tea, exactly the way she liked it, with too much milk and no sugar, which she had never told him, and set it in front of her. Only then did he sit. "How?" she said, before she could stop herself. "Did you know?" "Know what?" "How I take my tea." He was silent for a moment. "I watched you, at the inn, for 9 hours. You drank 3 cups of tea. The girl who served you put sugar in the first, and you drank it without complaining and without enjoying it. The second and third, you took yourself from the pot. You did not put sugar in either, but you put a great deal of milk in both. I did not, in those 9 hours, see you complain about anything. Not the cold, not the broken axle, not the woman in the corner who tried to take your seat by the fire. You moved without being asked. You gave your last shilling to a beggar. You mended your glove with a thimble that was clearly older than you were. And you read, when you were not mending, a copy of Cowper's poem someone had left on a table, with the kind of attention that suggested you had read it many times before. He paused. By the end of the 9th hour, Miss Whitford, I knew rather a great deal about you. You did not know my name? No, I did not. I have spent 18 months trying to find out. Hester stared at her tea. How? She said. Did you find it? Lady Caroline saw you, 3 weeks ago, at St. James's in the morning, walking behind your cousin. She has never seen me describe a person and not recognize them. She came home and told me. I made certain inquiries. I learned that the Queen had selected Lady Felicity for me. I was given 3 weeks' notice of the betrothal. I went to court last night intending to refuse her. I did not, until I saw you behind the second pillar, know that you would be present. He paused. When I saw you, I made the decision that I have made. I do not regret it. I will not retract it. And I must beg your forgiveness, Miss Whitford, for the manner of it. I had no other manner available. Hester set down her cup. She had been looking at the tea because looking at the Duke in this small room in the morning light was more than she yet knew how to do. She forced herself to look up. He was waiting. Your Grace. Adrian, if you will. Adrian. The name felt strange in her mouth. The name of a man. Adrian. I do not know how to be the woman you saw at the inn. I do not know whether she exists. I have spent 15 years being told that she does not. That what you saw was a poor relation doing what a poor relation does. Mending what was hers because no one else would mend it for her. Drinking her tea without complaint because complaint was not granted to her. I am not what you think me. I am only what I have been allowed to be. And I do not know whether that is a thing you can love, or only a thing you imagined. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he took a long breath. Hester. Yes. I am not asking you to be the woman at the inn. I am asking you to consider that the woman at the inn was you. Whoever told you that what you did there was nothing was lying. It was not nothing. To remain courteous through 9 hours of cold and inconvenience is not nothing. To give your last shilling to a stranger when you had nothing yourself is not nothing. To mend your only glove with care in a public room where no one was looking is not nothing. I do not need you to perform any of these things again. I am only telling you that I have seen you do them once, and I do not require further proof. She could not speak. He went on, more quietly. I have arranged for a small allowance to be sent to you weekly. The funds are yours. They are not contingent. They will continue whether you marry me or refuse me, until you no longer have need of them, or until I am dead. Whichever comes first. You have no obligation. I want you to know that you have no obligation. The reason I am telling you this now is that I believe, I may be wrong, that you have not, in some time, been told that any of your decisions belong to you. The breakfast room was very quiet. Hester found that she was crying, not loudly, only that her eyes had been filling, slowly, while he spoke, and now the tears had reached the edge. She did not look away from him. Adrian, yes. If I ask you a question, will you answer it honestly? I will. Why me? He did not hesitate. Because I have been a dead man for 3 years, Hester, and on a wet afternoon in November, in a dirty inn at Tadcaster, I watched a young woman mend a glove with a silver thimble, and I felt, for the first time since my brother's death, that I was alive. I do not know why it was you. I did not choose it. I do not require it to mean anything. I only require, at this point in my life, to be near it. If you tell me to leave you alone, I will leave you alone. If you tell me to wait, I will wait. If you tell me yes, I will spend the rest of my life being grateful. But I cannot anymore pretend that you are not the only thing I have wanted in 3 years. He stopped. She looked at him. She thought suddenly of her father. He had said to her once when she was 9, only a year before he died, Hester, you do not have to make yourself smaller to be loved. You have only not yet been loved by anyone with the eyesight to see you. She had forgotten this. She had let herself forget it for 15 years. because it was easier to forget than to wait for the thing that had not come. "I will stay the week," she said, "and then I will come with you to Thornmere to consider further, if that is acceptable to you." "It is acceptable to me, Hester." She lifted her chin, that small motion she had been making her whole life, and she smiled, just at the edge of her mouth, just enough to be seen. It was the first time she had smiled at a man in 15 years. The Duke of Thornmere set down his coffee very carefully, as if afraid to break something, and he smiled back. Chapter 6. The road north. The week passed faster than any week of her life. Lady Caroline kept her promise. They walked in the garden every morning. Caroline told her, in pieces, the things the Duke would not. About his boyhood, younger son, sent to fight while his elder brother stayed home and inherited. About the brother, James, who had been kind in the way of men who had never known want. About the war, Adrian's commission, his decoration at Vittoria, the wound that gave him the scar. About the letter, 3 years ago, that told him James was dead at Salamanca. The title was his. He had returned to Thornmere and said very quietly, "I do not want this," and accepted it anyway, because there was a child to provide for, and Caroline, and a name. "He has not laughed in 3 years, Caroline said. "Not properly, I want you to know this. I do not tell you to put weight on you. I tell you because I have seen, this week, the corners of his eyes move in a way I had begun to think they had forgotten. I do not know what is between you, Hester. I only know that whatever it is real." Henry came with them sometimes. He showed her the wooden horse Captain. He explained, in great seriousness, that Captain had a small chip in his ear because Henry had once ridden him too hard against a chair leg, and that this was an injury Captain bore with dignity. Hester admired Captain at length. She mended a small tear in the saddle blanket Henry had been using. Henry approved of her. "You are going to live with us," Henry told her on the 3rd day, with the certainty of a child who had been told nothing. "I do not know yet, Henry." "You will," he said. She did not argue with him. On the 7th morning, the Duke came to her in the garden. "Hester, the post-chaise leaves at noon for Thornmere. You are not obliged, but if you wish to come, your trunk is packed." "I do not have a trunk." "You do now." Caroline saw to it. "Please do not be offended. She would not let me purchase anything myself, but she purchased what she described as the absolute minimum a Christian woman requires for a journey, and I am told it is in the front hall." "I am not offended, Adrian." "Then will you come?" "I will." They left at noon. The drive was 2 days. Adrian secured her a private parlor and a maid at the inn that night. He did not so much as enter the room with her. He took his own meal in the public dining room. He sent her a small posy of dried lavender to her door, with a note that said only, "In case the room smells of pipe smoke." She slept with the lavender on her pillow. On the 2nd day, they came over a low ridge in the early evening. Below them, in a fold of the moor, was a house. Not a large house by ducal standards. Older than Whitehurst Palace. Older than the title itself. Pale gray stone weathered to the color of dove feathers. Deep, narrow windows from an age before glass had become cheap. Ivy and roses growing up the south wall. A cluster of chimneys above a slate roof. Beyond the house, stables. A chapel. A walled garden, all of it held in the long blue light of a Yorkshire evening that Hester had not seen since her father had died. She did not know she was crying until Adrian, beside her in the carriage, very quietly handed her his handkerchief. "It is not a grand house," he said. "It is the most beautiful house I have ever seen." He was silent for a moment. "It has not been a happy one, not since James died. I have not known what to do with it. I have not had, the heart, I think is the word, to do anything with it. I have been waiting perhaps for someone to come who would know. I do not know how to run a house, Adrian. I have only ever served in one." "Hester," he said very gently, "you have served in one for 15 years. There is no part of running a house you do not know. Whether you wish to do so is another question, but you must not tell me you do not know." She laughed. It was small, surprised. It surprised her so much that she covered her mouth with the handkerchief. "Forgive me," she said. "Don't." The carriage rolled down the long drive. Between the avenue of beeches that her aunt would have called unkempt, and that Hester thought, privately, fiercely, was the most welcoming approach to any house she had ever seen. Thornmere Hall opened its doors to her, and Hester Whitford, who had spent 15 years not knowing where she would sleep next, walked through them. Chapter 7. The Becoming. The first month at Thornmere was the slowest month of Hester's life, and the most full. The days unfolded without hurry, without anxiety. She did not at first know how to trust it. She kept waiting to be told to stop. She kept waiting to be told that she had taken too much. She learned the house by inhabiting it. The grandfather clock in the front hall ran 3 minutes slow. The spring had needed adjusting since the year James died. Nobody had had the heart to fix it. The window in the library would not latch when the wind came from the west. The fourth flagstone from the kitchen door was loose. It had been loose since 1798. The third stair on the back staircase had a worn dip in the center. Adrian, as a boy of 8, had slid down it on a tea tray. He had refused to admit it to anyone but his brother. Hester learned all of these things the way one learns the shape of a sleeping cat, by being in the room with it long enough. She was slowly becoming a person who knew a house. She was slowly becoming a person. She kept waiting for someone to tell her she had taken too much. In the second week, she found the housekeeper's books in a state that would have made her aunt weep. The accounts had not been balanced in 8 months. The linen presses had not been inventoried in 2 years. The kitchen garden had been left to a head gardener who had retired, in spirit if not in fact, the day Adrian's brother had died. There was mint in the kitchen garden, wild, unpruned, gone half to seed. Hester, on her third afternoon, knelt in the soil in a borrowed apron and began to bring it back. Adrian found her there. He stood in the gravel, path, hands in his pockets. He watched her cut back the runners with a small pair of scissors she had borrowed from the still room. "You will ruin that dress." "It is one of Caroline's old dresses. She told me to ruin it." "Did she?" "She said, and I quote, 'If you do not ruin at least one of those before the month is out, I shall be very disappointed in you.'" He laughed, small, quiet, and Hester, kneeling in the dirt with mint stains on her sleeves, looked up, saw, in the late afternoon light, the corner of his mouth move in the way Caroline had described, the way that had not moved in 3 years, and she thought, "I did this. By accident. By being here. By cutting back mint." She did not say so. "Will you help, Adrian?" He knelt beside her in the dirt. He had never, she thought, knelt in dirt in his life. His hands did not know what to do at first. She showed him, "Here, you cut here, against the runner, and you pull back the dead leaves like so," and he was a careful student. They worked side by side for an hour. They did not at any point speak of what they were to each other. When they had finished, he sat back on his heels in the soil. He looked at the work they had done. He was quiet for a long moment. "I have not," he said, "made anything live in 3 years. Adrian, I do not say it for sympathy. I say it because it is true. I have managed the estate, signed the papers, ridden the boundaries. I have not in 3 years planted a thing, or mended a thing, or asked a question whose answer I cared about. I had not understood, until this afternoon, what the difference was." She did not know what to say. She did not need to say anything. She put her hand gently on the back of his, the hand that had cut back the mint, that was streaked with green sap. They stayed that way until the sun moved another 1/4 inch across the garden wall. She did not yet know that this was the closest he had come, in 3 years, to telling her about the war. She would. Later. Not yet. The mistake came in the 3rd week. It was not a large mistake. It would not, in the telling, be the kind of thing that broke marriages. But Hester would think of it, afterwards, as the day she nearly lost everything by being herself. By being, that is, the woman she had been at 12, the one who had learned that the only safe answer was no, thank you. Adrian came to her that morning, in the morning room, where she had been writing letters on his behalf. "Hester, will you come down to the stables?" "Of course." In the yard there was a horse, a small chestnut mare, perhaps 15 hands, soft white blaze, quiet eyes. Collie, the head groom, was holding the bridle. He had a look on his face that suggested he had been part of a plan. "This is Marigold," Adrian said. "She is yours." Hester stopped. She did not move toward the horse. She did not move toward Adrian. She felt, as if from a great distance, the old voice rise up in her chest. You do not need a horse. You have not earned a horse. He cannot mean it. He is testing whether you have the manners to refuse. She had been trained to that voice for 15 years. The voice was wrong. She knew it was wrong. And she still, for one terrible moment, listened to it. Adrian, no, I cannot accept her. Hester, it is too much. I have not been here long enough. I have not given you enough reason. Please, send her back. Something in Adrian's face did a thing she had not seen before. It was not anger, it was hurt. The kind of hurt that did not know how to defend itself, because the person doing the hurting was the person it had stopped being defended against. Hester! Adrian, please! Marigold has been in the stable for 9 days. I purchased her from a friend in Lincolnshire. She is gentle. She is sound. She is mine, which means she is yours. He stopped. He breathed in carefully. Hester, I have told you, in front of the Queen, that I will marry you. I have brought you to my house. I have introduced you to my child. I have given you my mother's silver dressing set, which is in the room upstairs, which you have not opened, because you do not yet believe it is yours. I have this morning bought you a horse. There is no test, there is no trial, there is no portion of you that is required to earn what is freely offered. And every time you tell me no, it is too much, you tell me that you do. Not yet believe me when I tell you who you are to me. I do not blame you. I understand it. But you must, please, try. She had not expected this. She had expected him to nod. Send the horse back. Never mention it again. She had expected the world to go on the way the world had gone on for 15 years, where one declined and was small and was safe. But Adrian Wexford was not a man who rewarded smallness. She looked at the horse. She looked at Collie, who was studiously examining the bridle in a way that suggested he had been told this might happen, and instructed to give them privacy. She looked at Adrian. His eyes were the color of November. Adrian, yes, I am sorry. I was answering the wrong question. I was answering the question I was asked at 12. The right question is whether I will accept the horse. And I will. Of course I will. She is beautiful. I am sorry. I am sorry. He closed his eyes for a moment. He opened them. Hester, you will say no to me again. You will do it many times. We will have this same fight, in different clothes, for the next 40 years. I am only asking that when you hear yourself doing it. When you hear the voice that says no, it is too much. You give yourself a single breath before you speak. One breath. To consider whether the voice is yours or whether it is 15 years of someone else's. That is all. One breath. One breath. One breath. She crossed to the mare. She put her hand slowly on the soft brown nose. The horse breathed in her palm, warm, uncomplaining. Hello, Marigold, Hester said, and she lifted her chin, that small motion she had been making her whole life. This time, for the first time, she meant it as a yes. That night, after Henry had been put to bed and Caroline had retired with a book, Adrian came to find her in the long gallery. She was looking at the portraits. There was one of Adrian, painted just before the war, that did not look like him at all, because the man in the painting smiled with both eyes, and Adrian did not. Hester, Adrian, may I show you something? You may show me anything. He led her down to his study. He had not, until this evening, shown her his study. It was a small, dark room, lined with books, a desk that faced a tall, narrow window. On the desk, a small wooden box. He opened it. Inside, on a folded piece of brown paper, was a glove. A woman's glove, brown leather, old, mended at the seam, once, neatly, with stitches laid down by a hand that knew its work. Hester's breath caught. Adrian, I have carried it for 18 months, from Yorkshire to Spain and back, from the peninsula to London to here. It has been on every desk I have sat at, in my coat at every state event. I am showing it to you now because I wish you to know that there has not been, in 18 months, a single day on which I did not look at it once. Whatever you doubt about me, you must not doubt this. She picked up the glove very carefully. It is mine. It is yours. You left it on the bench at the inn when the coach was finally repaired. You had been mending the other one. You mistook them. You left the mended one. The innkeeper would have thrown it away. I asked for it. Hester, I do not know how to tell you, even now, what it has meant to have it. She held it in both hands. You have not told me, she said carefully, what the war was. He was quiet for a long moment. I have not. Will you? He sat down in the chair behind the desk. He did not invite her to sit. He simply began to speak, looking at the glove in her hands. My brother was killed at Salamanca. You know this much. What you do not know is that I was 100 yards away when it happened. I was rallying my own men. I saw him fall. I hesitated. I do not know how long I hesitated. 3 seconds perhaps, perhaps less. I was the senior officer present. My duty was to my men. By the time I reached him, he was dead. He had been alive when he fell. He died, I think, while I was deciding what to do. He paused. I have not told this to anyone. Not to Caroline, not to my mother before she died, not to the man who served as my second in the field. I have lived inside it for 3 years. I am telling you because I do not want you ever to wonder why I do not laugh easily. It is not because I do not love. It is because I have not, in 3 years, believed I deserved to. Hester set the glove down on the desk. She crossed the small room. She did not say anything. She put her arms around him, where he stood by the window. She held his head against her shoulder. She did not let go. After a long while, she felt him begin, very quietly, to weep. He had not wept in 3 years. He wept for a long time. When he had finished, he wiped his face with his sleeve, the way a boy does. He looked up at her. I am sorry. Adrian Wexford, you will not be sorry. Not for that. Not ever for that. Do you understand me? Yes. Say it back. I will not be sorry. Good. He looked at her then with the expression of a man who had, at last, set down something he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten the weight of it. Hester, will you walk with me before supper tomorrow? I will. They walked the next evening the perimeter of the kitchen garden, then the herb garden, then along the path that led to the small chapel where Adrian's brother and his parents were buried. He did not take her into the chapel. He stopped at the lich gate. James loved this place. I am sorry I did not know him. He would have loved you. You think so? I know it. He had the ability, which I have not, to be at ease. He would have heard you laugh once and decided you were family. It took me 18 months to be sure of you, and even then, I had to interrupt a state event to find out your name. James would have managed the entire thing in a single afternoon over tea. I was always slower. You were not slower, Adrian. You were certain. There is a difference. He looked at her for a long moment. I would like to kiss you. I will not until you wish it, but I want you to know that I would like to. She was silent for what felt like a long time, was perhaps only the length of one breath. I have never been kissed, Adrian. I know. How could you know? Because no one who has been kissed properly stands the way you stand. You stand as if you have spent 15 years preparing not to be touched. I would like to undo that. Slowly, when you tell me to. I will not before. She lifted her chin, that small motion. Tonight, after supper, in the rose garden, if you will. I will. He kissed her that night in the rose garden, under a moon 3 days from full. It was not what she had expected. She had read in novels that kisses were transports. That one was overwhelmed. That one became a stranger to one's own body. None of these things happened. What happened was that he took her face very gently in his hands, the way one takes a cup of something hot and breakable. He kissed her, once, slowly, on the mouth. He rested his forehead against hers. He did not move. For what must have been a full minute, she felt his breath. She felt his hand, the one that had cupped her jaw, slide down to her shoulder and rest there. She felt, beneath every other feeling, the absolute stillness of being, for the first time in her life, held by a person who did not want her to be smaller than she was. Adrian, Hester, I am not going to leave. I know. I am going to marry you. I know that as well. You knew before I did? I have known, he said, since you walked through the door of Caroline's house and apologized for not having a trunk. She laughed. Into his shoulder. He held her in the rose garden for as long as she would let him. The moon rose over Thornmere, And somewhere in the kitchen, the cook was already beginning to plan the wedding breakfast, because servants always know first. Chapter 8. The Mistake. The trouble, when it came on a wet afternoon in late September, the third month of Hester's stay at Thornmere. She had been in the still room with Mrs. Fenton, putting up the last of the season's preserves, when Annie came running up from the front hall, cap askew. "Miss Hester, there's a carriage, from London. It's Lady Felicity Ashford, miss. She says she has come from her mother's sickbed. She says she is not to be turned away." Hester set down the jar of damson preserve. She had known, with a part of her she had been ignoring, that this would come. She had not known when. "Where is his grace?" "In the long meadow, miss, with the steward. They are not back till dusk. Send for him, quietly. Annie, quietly. Do not let her see the boy go." "Yes, miss." She walked to the front hall. Felicity stood in the middle of it. She had not removed her bonnet. Her eyes were red, but Hester, who had spent 15 years studying Felicity's eyes, knew the difference between weeping and the careful application of a hot cloth before stepping out of a carriage. "Hester, Felicity, my mother is dying. I am very sorry to hear it. She has asked to see me. The journey has exhausted me. I have nowhere else to stop on the road north. I beg the Duke's hospitality for one night. Surely you would not turn out a cousin in distress." Hester looked at her. 15 years of looking, 15 years of being looked through. "Felicity," she said quietly, "I will give you a bed for one night. You will dine in your room. You will leave at first light. You will not, while you are under this roof, attempt to be alone with his grace. Do you understand me?" Felicity's smile flickered. "Hester, I am sure I do not know what you are implying." "You know exactly what I am implying. You came 200 miles uninvited. You have a mother who is, I am quite certain, in excellent health. You came to do a thing. You will not do it. Tell me you understand, and I will give you the green room and a hot supper. If you cannot tell me you understand, you will sleep in the village inn, which I assure you is acceptable for one night." Felicity stared at her. "You have changed." "I have not changed, Felicity. I have merely stopped pretending." Long silence. "I understand," Felicity said. She did not understand. Adrian came in at dusk. Hester met him in the front hall. She told him, briefly, without dramatics, what had happened. He listened without interrupting. When she had finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You should have sent her to the village inn." "I considered it." "Why did you not?" "Because she is my cousin, Adrian, and because for 15 years she was the closest thing I had to a sister. I do not wish her well, but I do not wish to be the kind of woman who turns a cousin out into the rain. Not yet. Not on her first attempt." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are kinder than I would have been." "I am tired, Adrian. There is a difference." He took her hand. He pressed it briefly to his mouth. "I will dine in my study. I will not leave it tonight. If you hear a footstep in the corridor that is not yours, you will know it is not mine. I am sorry, Hester. I should have warned you when we left London that she might come. I did not, because I did not wish to alarm you. I see now I should have. I will not again withhold what you ought to know. Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive, Adrian." But he had already turned, gone up the long stair to his study. The door had closed behind him. She did not, until later, understand what he had been trying to tell her. It came, the trouble, exactly as she should have anticipated. Hester went to bed at 10. She had told Annie to bring her a glass of warm milk. She drank it. She put out the candle. She lay in the dark and listened to the rain on the window and the slow tick of the hall clock, 3 minutes slow. She thought of Adrian in his study downstairs. She thought of Henry asleep 3 rooms over with his wooden horse on the pillow. And she thought, with the steady warm certainty that had been growing in her for weeks, "I am almost home." She had almost fallen asleep. It was the third stair on the back staircase that woke her, the worn one, the one with the dip in the center where Adrian had slid as a boy. It made a particular small creak, and Hester, who knew the house now, sat up at once. Someone was on the back stairs. She slid out of bed, took her shawl, did not, in her hurry, remember to put on her slippers. She crossed to the door, opened it a crack. The corridor was dark, but at the far end of it, near the head of the back staircase, a figure was moving. a woman in a thin silk wrapper, carrying no candle, moving with the careful, soundless step of someone who knew exactly where she was going and did not wish to be heard. Felicity, going down the back stairs, toward the study. Hester's first thought was clean and clear. I will go down. I will stop her. I will tell her to go to bed. Her second thought arrived a heartbeat later, and it was not clean, and it was not clear, and it did not belong to her. It belonged to the 12-year-old girl who had been told that the only safe answer was, no, thank you. It belonged to the 15-year-old who had watched her cousin tear a page from her favorite book. It belonged to the 19-year-old who had been told that her usefulness consisted in not embarrassing the family. It belonged to the woman who had stood behind the second pillar with her eyes lowered. The thought was, he is alone in his study at midnight. He is a man. She is beautiful. He has not seen her in 3 months. Perhaps he asked her to come. It was a wrong thought. It was a thought Adrian had told her 3 weeks ago in the stable yard, to give one breath before believing. But she did not give it one breath. She did not give it any breath at all. The thought simply was. The way the cold was. The way her bare feet on the floor were. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom. She did not move down the corridor. She did not go to the study. She did not stop her cousin. She did not, in that one terrible quarter of an hour, do any of the things a woman who trusted her own home would have done. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. She listened to the rain. After some minutes, she heard footsteps coming back up the stairs. Quick, light, Felicity, returning to her room. The fact that Felicity had returned within 15 minutes, too quickly to have done what she had clearly come to do, did not register with Hester. The voice in her chest had become so loud that it was the only thing she could hear. She got up. She lit no candle. She did not need light. She had always been able to pack in the dark. She put on her plainest dress, the gray one from Wexham House. She had not worn it in 3 months. She had kept it folded at the bottom of the trunk because she had not, in 3 months, been able to make herself throw it away. She put on her boots. She wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She took the silver thimble from the bedside table, held it in her hand for a long moment, and then, with a deliberation she did not understand, she set it back down on the pillow where her head had been. She left no note. She had never, in 15 years, left a note. She did not know how. She took, from Adrian's library, where she had returned it just yesterday after mending a small tear, the brown leather glove. She did not know why. She slipped it into the pocket of her dress. She went down the front stairs, because she did not wish to walk past the study. She went out through the small side door near the kitchen, past the loose flagstone, the fourth from the door, which sang under her foot as it always did. She went to the stable. She did not wake Collie. She did not saddle Marigold, because Marigold was not, however much Adrian had said it, hers. She walked instead the half-mile through the wet dark to the village. At the village, she sat under the eaves of the small inn until the morning coach came at 4 o'clock. She paid her fare with the last of the small allowance Adrian had been sending her every week, the allowance that was hers regardless, the allowance she had not, until tonight, ever had to use. The coach went south. It went, by the schedule painted on the side of the post office, all the way to Tadcaster. Hester Whitford got into the coach. She did not look back at Thornmere, because she did not yet know how to look back at the things she was leaving without breaking herself in half. Adrian woke at 5:15. He had slept badly. Somewhere in the night, he had heard a door open and a door close. He had told himself it was Mrs. Fenton checking the back kitchen. He had not gone to investigate, because he had told Hester he would not leave the study, and he was a man who kept his word. He woke, he dressed, he went to the green bedroom first, to make absolutely certain Felicity was leaving on the carriage that had been ordered. The green bedroom was empty. The bed was made. Felicity was already gone. She had left, perhaps an hour ago, as he had instructed. There was, on the dressing table, a folded note in her handwriting. He did not read it. He picked it up, put it in his pocket, went on. He went to Hester's room. He knocked once, softly. He knocked again. There was no answer. He opened the door. The bed was made. The trunk was open. The dresses were gone. On the pillow lay the silver thimble. He stood in the doorway for what felt, afterwards, like a long time. It was perhaps the length of 3. Oh, breaths. When he could move again, he turned, walked down the corridor, opened Caroline's door without knocking, for the first time in 11 years. Caroline, she is gone. Caroline sat up. Adrian, she is gone. The thimble is on the pillow. Felicity is gone. Felicity must have done, I do not know what she did. Caroline, she is gone. Caroline was out of bed at once. She crossed to him, took him, briefly, by both shoulders. Adrian, listen to me. Yes. Where would she go? I do not know. She has nowhere. Wexham House will not have her. She has no money. She has no... Adrian, where would she go? Think. He thought. It came to him slowly. The way a thing one has known forever comes when one stops trying to remember. Tadcaster, the black boar. She would go to where it began. Caroline nodded. Then go, now. Take the chestnut. Do not stop. I will manage Henry. I will manage the house. You will not stop until you have her. Do you understand me? You will not stop. Caroline, I told you 3 months ago that you have been a ghost. You have not, since you brought her here, been a ghost. Do not be a ghost again. Go. He went. It was 140 miles from Thornmere to Tadcaster. He rode. Through the morning rain, through the noon when it stopped, through the afternoon when it began again. He changed horses at Boroughbridge. He changed again at Wetherby. He did not eat. He did not stop, except to change. He spoke to no one. The chestnut at Wetherby, a hard-mouthed gelding the ostler did not recommend, gave him no trouble, because Adrian, by the time he mounted it, was not a man any horse would have given trouble. He arrived at the Black Boar Inn at Tadcaster at 8:20 in the evening. The light was failing. The rain had returned. The yard was nearly empty. He swung down from the gelding. He did not give it to the ostler. He led it himself to the trough. He stood in the inn yard, in the rain, for one long moment, because he did not yet know whether what he was about to find inside was Hester Whitford, or only Hester Whitford's empty seat, and a landlord who would tell him she had taken the morning coach south. He went in. The tap room was warm, a dozen people in it, a fire, the smell of roast mutton and pipe smoke. She was at a small table by the window. Her back was to him. She was wearing the gray dress. She was mending a glove. She had a small candle on the table beside her. Her grandmother's silver thimble was on her finger. She had taken it from the pillow then. She had come back for it on her way out. The impossibility of how she had done that without him knowing did not, in that moment, matter to him at all. She was pushing the needle through the seam with the same careful, patient stitches he had watched her make on a wet afternoon in November of 1811. The glove she was mending was the brown leather glove from his desk. She had been mending it, by the fall of the candlelight on the half-finished work, for some time. Adrian stood in the doorway. He could not move. She did not look up. She had not heard the door. The tap room was loud enough that the door could open without being heard, and she was bent over her work. He watched her, for what he afterwards thought might have been a full minute, exactly as he had watched her once before, 18 months ago, in the same room, at the same table, mending a different glove. A woman at the next table noticed him, stared, glanced at Hester, glanced back at him, did not speak. He moved then, the way a man moves when he has decided, finally, what is required of him. He crossed the tap room. He did not stop until he was directly in front of her. She looked up. She did not gasp. She did not drop the glove. She did not weep. She simply looked at him, with the dignified, exhausted face of a woman who had ridden a coach all night, and a morning and an afternoon, who had only just stopped moving. Adrian. Hester. She set the glove down. You are wet through. I have been in the rain. Have you eaten? No. Adrian. Hester. May I sit? Yes. He sat. He did not at first speak. He looked at her face, the small smudge of soot on her cheek from the coach, the tired shadow under her eyes, the way her hair had come down from its pins, and he saw, with absolute clarity, that he had nearly lost her, and that the reason he had nearly lost her was a thing he had failed to do. Hester, I should have warned you, about Felicity. I told you in the hall when I came in tonight that I should have, but I should have told you 3 weeks ago that this might happen. I should have prepared you. I did not, because I did not wish to alarm you. I see now that what I called not alarming you was, in fact, withholding from you a piece of information you had a right to. I am sorry." She listened without interrupting. When he had finished, she said, very quietly, "Adrian." "Yes." "I assumed you had asked her to come." He went still. "I assumed you had asked her to come, or that you welcomed her, or that being a man, alone in your study at midnight, you would not, in the moment, refuse her. I did not give myself one breath. I gave myself no breath at all. I heard her on the back stairs. I went to the door. I saw her in the corridor. And the voice in my chest said, 'Of course.' And I listened to it. I packed my trunk. I left. I walked to the village. I took the morning coach. I came here. Because I did not know where else to go that was not Wexham House. And I could not face Wexham House. I came to the Black Boar because it was the only inn I knew the name of in the south. I stole your glove, Adrian, from your desk. I do not know why. I have been mending it because I had nothing else to do with my hands. I have been wrong. I have been very wrong. I should have given myself one breath. I did not. I am sorry." He looked at her for a long moment. "Hester?" "Yes." "Will you come outside with me?" "Adrian, will you come outside with me? Please. I do not wish to have this conversation in front of the publican." She rose. She gathered the glove and the thimble and her shawl. She followed him out into the inn yard, into the rain, which had not stopped, and which would not stop now until well after midnight. He stood in the middle of the yard. He did not turn to her. He knelt. He knelt in the wet flagstones of the inn yard, in the rain, in the gathering dark, and he looked up at her. "Hester, I have been, all my life, a man who counts on what is owed. I was the second son. I was given an inheritance only by my brother's death. I was given a title I never asked for. I have lived for 34 years with the steady understanding that nothing is mine that has not been paid for, or earned, or received with proper humility. And then I saw you in this inn, 18 months ago, in the rain, mending a glove. And for the first time in my life, I wanted a thing I had not earned and could not pay for. Do you understand? I have been afraid of you, Hester, since the afternoon I saw you. I have been afraid of you because you are the only thing I have ever wanted that I could not, by force or by virtue, make mine. And I have failed you tonight by failing to say this. I let you assume I might still want a thing I could buy. I have not been honest about what you are to me. I am being honest now. There is no version of me that wants Felicity Ashford in any room. There is no version of me that wants any woman at any time in any room who is not you. There has not been since November of 1811. There will not be, ever. I am Hester. I am yours. Whether you marry me or not, whether you come back to Thornmere or not, I am yours. In the only way I have ever been anyone's, and I will be yours when I am dead. Do you hear me? Yours? She did not speak. She was, he saw, weeping, not loudly, the way she had wept at the breakfast table at Caroline's house 3 months ago, when she had not yet known she was permitted to weep aloud. She knelt slowly on the wet stone of the inn yard, so that her face was level with his. She took the brown leather glove from her shawl. She held it up between them. It is finished. I finished mending it on the coach. It was the only way I could keep my hands from shaking. She put it on him, onto his right hand. The stitches were small. The work was good. The leather was dark with rain. Adrian, wear it. You will need it riding back. It is cold. He looked at the glove on his hand. He looked at her face. He understood, not in his head, in the place beneath the head, where the slow understandings happen, that she had just said, I love you, not in words, in a thing his hand could feel. He took her face in both hands. Hester, Adrian, I love you. I know. You will say it back to me, in time. Yes. But this was the saying. Yes. He helped her up. He paid the publican for the supper she had not eaten. He hired a chaise, a fast one, with 2 horses, the gelding too tired to carry them home. And at 9:30 in the evening, in the rain, in the worn brown leather glove she had mended on the coach south, the Duke of Thornmere drove the woman he had nearly lost back to Yorkshire, the long road north, 200 miles, in the dark, and neither of them, for the entire length of it, let go of the other's hand. Chapter 9. The Letter. They reached Thornmere at 4 in the morning. Caroline was waiting in the front hall in her dressing gown, holding a candle, Henry asleep on the settle beside her. She had been waiting, by the look of her, since midnight. When she saw them through the open door, both of them, hand in hand, both of them soaked through, she made a small sound that was not a word. She handed the candle to Mrs. Fenton. She crossed the hall. She took Hester in her arms, held her for what must have been a full minute. "You came back." "I did. I told him you would." "Caroline, you will not please do that again." "I will not." "Adrian." Caroline turned. "She is wet through. I will put her in the green bath and find her something dry. You will go to the kitchen and eat something. Or I will make Mrs. Bram weep, and I am too tired to manage 2 weeping women in one night. Go." He went. Henry woke briefly on the settle, saw Hester, reached out with one small hand, said, in the sleep-thick voice of a child who had been dreaming, "You came back." "I came back, Henry. Captain knew you would." He went back to sleep. Hester knelt beside the settle for a long moment, kissed his forehead, lifted his small hand, held it against her cheek. She thought of the silver thimble in her pocket, which she had taken from the pillow on her way out, and which she had not, even in her worst hour on the south coach, been able to leave behind. She thought, "This is my home. I knew it. I forgot it for 15 minutes. I will not forget it again." She slept until noon. Adrian did not wake her. He did not, in fact, leave the chair beside the bed for more than a quarter hour at a time. The next 2 days passed slowly. There had been an unspoken understanding between them since the inn-yard, the kind that does not require the asking. But Hester knew, watching him, that he was waiting. He was waiting because he wished her to do the asking this time. Not because he required it, because he wished to give her the gift of choosing, after she had spent 15 years being unable to. She let him wait until the second afternoon. They were sitting on the low stone bench by the south wall. The mint had spread again into the herb bed. The afternoon was clear. "Adrian, Hester, will you marry me?" He looked at her for a long, steady moment. "I will." In the chapel, with Caroline, with Henry, with the tenants, not in London, not at court. No, and not in white silk. You may wear whatever you choose. I will wear ivory, with mint in my hair, from the kitchen garden. Do you mind? "Hester, I do not mind. I would marry you in a sack." She laughed. "That is a lie, Adrian." "It is, but it was a fine one." He kissed her on the bench by the south wall. She lifted her chin afterwards. That small motion. He laughed. "Yes. Yes, what?" "Yes, to everything. To all of it." The letter from the Queen arrived on the morning of the 3rd day. It came by royal courier, in a leather case bound with a silver cord. Adrian opened it at the breakfast table, Hester sitting across from him. He read it once, set it down, picked it up, read it again. Then he handed it to her without a word. The handwriting was not the Queen's, the signature was. The contents were, in essence, simple. The Earl of Wexham had laid a formal complaint at court. Lady Felicity Ashford had been publicly humiliated. The honor of an old family had been damaged. The Queen was, regrettably, required to act. The Duke of Thornmere was hereby informed that, should he proceed with his stated intention of marrying Miss Hester Whitford, his commission would be withdrawn, his position at court rescinded, his royal patronage cancelled, his presence at the next session of the House of Lords neither expected nor welcome. The Queen remained, sincerely, etc. Hester set down the letter. "Adrian, Hester, this is everything you have. It is what the Queen can give me. It is not what I have. There is a difference. You will lose your seat. I will. Your commission. I will. Your patronage. Hester, I have an income from this estate of £19,000 a year. I have a son in Henry, who will inherit it. I have a sister in Caroline. I have you. The Queen cannot take any of these things. She can take only what she gave me, which I never asked for, and have never used. Let her take it. I withdraw." "You cannot withdraw. You are a duke. A duke is a man with land and a name. I shall keep both. I shall simply keep them in Yorkshire. I shall not return to court. If the Queen wishes to find me, she may. If she wishes to censure me in the Lords, she may. I shall not attend to be censured. I shall be here, with my wife, and with my son, and with my sister-in-law. We shall be very happy. The queen will eventually die. Her successor may possibly be a man of better sense, and if not, it will not matter, because I shall by then be dead myself. And Henry will inherit, and Henry will make his own decisions. The matter is settled. Hester looked at him. Adrian. Hester. Are you certain? I have been certain since November of 1811. I have only become more certain with every month since. Do not, my love, ask me whether I am certain. Ask me whether I would survive losing you. The answer is no. So, if you wish me to keep the commission and the patronage and the seat in the Lords, you must marry me, because the only thing that would force me to give them up is your absence, and your absence would also force me to give up considerably more than that. She did not speak for a long moment. Then she said, I love you. She had said it once before, 3 days ago, in the rain at the inn. She had said it with a glove, and with stitches she had laid down on the south coach when she could not stop her hands from shaking. Adrian had heard her, had received it with both hands, with the part of him that did not require words. He had loved her for it, but she had not, until now, said it aloud. She had been waiting for the words to feel as true as the stitches. She did not feel afraid anymore. Adrian rose from his chair. He came around to her side of the table. He bent his head to hers, held her face in both hands, the way he had held it in the inn-yard. I have been waiting, Hester. I know. I am sorry I made you wait. I would have waited longer. I know that too. She bent her head to his. They stayed that way, in the breakfast room of Thornmere Hall, while outside the window the Yorkshire wind moved through the beeches, and somewhere in the kitchen the cook was beating eggs for a custard, and the Queen's letter sat on the table where they had left it, no longer of any significance whatsoever. Chapter 10. The wedding. They were married 11 days later, in the small chapel at Thornmere, on a clear, cold morning in early October, with 23 people in attendance, none of them representing the crown, none of them representing the Earl of Wexham, none of them representing the line of British nobility from which Hester had been excluded for 15 years. The 23 were these: Caroline, Henry, Mrs. Fenton, the housekeeper, Mrs. Bram, the cook, Colley, the head groom, who had taught Henry to ride, the 4 maids of the house, the estate steward and his wife, the vicar, the tenant farmers and their wives, 11 of them, who had asked permission to attend, and had been told they would be insulted if they did not. Henry carried the rings. He had practiced for a week. He had practiced with Captain, riding pillion in his pocket. When Hester walked down the short aisle on Caroline's arm, Henry stood at the altar beside Adrian. He held the rings out on a small velvet cushion he had insisted on carrying himself. Hester wore a dress of pale ivory silk. Caroline had ordered it from London. In her hand, she carried a small posy, not lilies, not orange blossom, not anything from a London florist. She carried mint, from the kitchen garden, cut that morning, by her own hand. When she reached the altar, Adrian looked at the posy and laughed. It was not a small laugh this time. Mint, he said. Mint. You did not even tell me. I wanted to. Surprise you, Adrian. You have. The vicar cleared his throat. He had known Adrian since Adrian was a boy. He was a kind man. He had been waiting 3 years to hold a wedding instead of a funeral at Thornmere. He was not in a hurry to begin. Dearly beloved, he said, smiling. The vows were short, the standard vows, said in voices that did not falter. When Adrian put the ring on her finger, his hand was steady. When she put the ring on his, hers was not. But she lifted her chin, that small motion of 15 years, and she made it through. He kissed her once at the altar. He did not hurry. He cupped her jaw the way he had at the inn-yard, the way he always would, the way one takes a cup of something hot and breakable. The vicar discreetly looked down at his prayer book. Henry slowly lowered the cushion. Caroline made a small sound in the front pew. When Adrian drew back, his thumb traced once, very lightly, along the line of her jaw. He had not done that before. She thought, with a clarity that felt like sunlight through stained glass. Oh, so this is what it is. In the chapel garden, the tenant farmers' wives had set up a long table and laid out a wedding breakfast. Mrs. Bram had been baking for 3 days. There was venison, a pie made of the last apples of the season, a great cake covered in white sugar, ale, a small barrel of cider one of the farmers had brought from his own press. Adrian danced the first dance with her on the chapel lawn, to a single fiddler who was, perhaps, not strictly in tune. It was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. When the dance ended, Caroline was crying. She had been crying on and off all morning. She came to Hester, held her by both arms. "You have brought him back." "I did not bring him back, Caroline. He was always there." "You are wrong, Hester. You did, and I shall not forget it. There will not in this house be a day when you are not loved." That night, in the bedroom at Thornmere that had become hers in the 3 months she had been there, Adrian came to her quietly. There was a fire, a single candle. There was the silver thimble, her grandmother's, the only thing she had brought from Wexham House, on the bedside table. There was the wooden horse Captain that Henry had insisted on lending her for one night, only one, because brides need horses too. And there, on the wall above the fireplace, where there had been only an empty space 3 days ago, was something new. It was the glove, behind glass, in a small frame of dark walnut, the brown leather, the careful row of stitches she had laid down on the south coach when she could not stop her hands from shaking, the second seam she had finished in the candlelight at the Black Boar, all of it preserved, fixed, framed. She crossed to the fireplace and put her hand on the glass. "Adrian, when did you do this?" "This morning, while you were dressing. Mrs. Fenton helped me. She has been keeping it from you for 4 days. It is mended." "It is." "You wore it back from Tadcaster." "I did. I have not since taken it off long enough to mend it a 3rd time. I asked the framer to leave the stitches as they were. They are yours. I would not have a stranger's hand on them." She turned to him. "It is the most beautiful thing in this house." "It is not the most beautiful thing in this house. But I will not tonight argue." He came up behind her. He put his arms around her. He rested his chin on the top of her head. He said very quietly, "Hester, I have loved you since the rain at the inn." "I know. And you?" "I have loved you," she said, "since you knelt in the rain." The candle burned down. The fire dimmed. Adrian Wexford and Hester Wexford, Duke and Duchess of Thornmere, fell asleep at last in each other's arms, in a bedroom in a Yorkshire manor, while outside the long blue moon rose over the moor, and the bell of the chapel rang the 11th hour of the night, and the world, for once, did not require anything of them at all. Chapter 11. 5 years later. 5 years passed. The way years do at Thornmere, quickly and slowly and full. The Queen was dead. She had not lived 2 years past the wedding. The new monarch had, as Adrian had predicted, proved to be a man of better sense. He had sent a personal letter to the Duke of Thornmere within a month of his accession, requesting his return to court at his earliest convenience. Adrian had written back, courteously, that his earliest convenience was unlikely to occur in this lifetime, but that he was deeply honored by the invitation. The new king, Caroline reported from a London visit, had laughed for 10 full minutes upon reading the reply. He had told the assembled Privy Council that the Duke of Thornmere was the only honest man left in England, and was to be left alone in perpetuity. He had been left alone. Caroline had remarried, a country physician, Dr. Roberts. He lived 2 villages over. He had courted her for 11 months with a patience that would have done credit to a saint. She lived now in a small white house surrounded by an apple orchard. She came to dinner at Thornmere every Sunday. Henry, 11 years old now, leggy and bookish, adored his stepfather with the ferocity of a child who had not, until then, known he had been wanting one. Henry was learning Latin. Hester was teaching him. She had discovered in the 3rd year of her marriage that she was a better teacher than she was a housekeeper, which was saying something, because she had become an extraordinary housekeeper. The accounts at Thornmere had been balanced every month for 5 years. The linen presses were inventoried twice yearly. The kitchen garden produced enough mint to flavor every cup of tea drunk on the estate, with surplus to send to Caroline. Felicity had married a viscount within a year of the wedding at Thornmere. The marriage was not a happy one. She wrote occasionally to Hester, long, careful letters about the weather and her wardrobe, and never, ever about Adrian. Hester wrote back briefly, and politely. She did not invite Felicity to visit. Felicity did not ask to come. They had reached in this way a kind of peace, which was perhaps as much as either of them could expect. In the spring of the 5th year, on a clear morning in May, when the apple trees in the orchard were beginning to show pink, Hester Whitford, Duchess of Thornmere, walked through the rose garden with her husband, while inside her she carried, 4 months along, the second child of their marriage. The first child, a daughter named Mary, after Hester's mother, was 3 years old, and was at that moment being chased around the croquet lawn by Henry, who had appointed himself her permanent and sworn protector. The roses were in full bloom. The mint had threatened to take over the herb garden for the 3rd year running. Hester had stopped trying to control it. Adrian stopped in the middle of the gravel path and turned her gently to face him. "Hester, Adrian, are you happy?" He had not asked her that question in 5 years of marriage, not because he did not want to know, because, until this morning, he had not been certain whether the question was fair to ask, whether the answer might not still, after everything, contain some shadow of the 15 years that had come before, some echo of the gray dress, the second pillar, the woman who had not been allowed to look at her own reflection. She looked up at him. She lifted her chin, that small motion, the one that had been with her whole life. That was no longer a defense. That was now only a way of meeting his eyes when he was tall and she was not. "Adrian, I am everything I never thought to be." He kissed her. It began to rain, softly, the way it does in May in Yorkshire. More mist than rain. They stood in it without moving. Somewhere on the croquet lawn, Mary was shrieking with laughter. Henry was pretending to be a dragon. The bell of the chapel began to ring the noon hour. "It was enough," Hester said quietly against his mouth. "What was my love? All of it was enough. The 15 years, the gray dress, the second pillar, even the rain at the inn, because all of it brought me here. And here is enough. It was always going to be enough, I think. The moment I knew where I was going." He held her face in both hands, the way he had held it on the first night in the rose garden, the way one holds a cup of something hot and breakable. "Hester Whitford, Adrian Whitford, you are the only thing I ever wanted. I know. And you, she said, are the only thing I was ever brave enough to want." The bell rang on. The mist thickened. The roses bowed under their own weight. And somewhere inside Thornmere Hall, a cook was beginning to plan the supper, because servants always know first. And the Duchess of Thornmere was 3 months from her second child, and the world, for once, was as it should be. If you have ever stood at the back of a room and wondered whether anyone in it could see you, if you have ever spent 15 years being told there was nothing in your reflection worth looking at, if you have ever been the woman in gray, behind the second pillar, holding your breath because breathing seemed presumptuous, then you know what Hester knew, and you know why it mattered when, for the first time in her life, a man crossed a room and stopped 6 paces from her and named her. You are not alone in having been overlooked. You are not alone in waiting for the eyesight to find you, and in the world of velvet and thorn, the eyesight always, in the end, finds its way. If this story moved you, if Hester's quiet courage or Adrian's quiet certainty found something in you, please take a moment, hit subscribe, turn on the bell. There is a new story every 2 days. Each one is a candle. Each one is for you. And before you go, tell me in the comments, did you see yourself in Hester, or in Adrian, or in someone else entirely? I read every single comment. Every story you tell me makes the next one I write better. The next candle is already lit. Good night, my loves.